that's the terms in which this conversation takes place. I've been told a lot, this is not a political film. That is fucking bullshit. It is a political film, but it carries out its discussion in that way, because to me, I could be wrong, that is conversational. That is an exchange that could be had.
Hey there, what you're about to check out is an exclusive Q&A with the brilliant writer and director Alex Garland. This was a surprise visit around the very first Toronto screening of his brand new film Civil War. And before we get into the Q&A, I want to give you a heads up. There is very light spoilers in this conversation, but mostly this is a look into the mind and soul of Alex and how this film came to be. Big shout out to Christian of Toronto After Dark for getting us into the screening, and also Elevation and A24 for making this happen a few days before it's released. And yeah, let's get right into it.
Congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
The film is set in the United States, but the United States is not the only place where there is political unrest, where there are political divides. Why choose the U.S. as the setting for this film rather than some other country that is experiencing the same side of polarization?
Well, certainly true, not the only country. My country, you could absolutely include several European countries. I mean, right now in the Middle East and Asia and South America, it's a sort of global phenomenon, or partially global. Because America is by far the biggest, most powerful and most influential country in the world. Like that, don't like it, it's really just a statement of fact, it's just the way it is. And I've certainly, so America has a radiating effect that my country, Britain, just doesn't have. Around the world, in complex ways, with all sorts of motivations, everybody looks to America in one way or another. So when America is suffering from this thing, that has a different level of importance attached to it.
And visually, when you blow up the Lincoln Memorial, I mean, it really, it makes an impact. That last 20 minutes of the film, because we are so familiar with the geography, with the landmarks, it is something that I found myself gobsmacked by the first time that I saw it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing when you're making a film and thinking about it in terms of messaging and effect and what accumulated effect and what filters through, how it filters through, why it filters through. I think, so the film was written 4 years ago. We couldn't shoot it because of COVID, but it was written 4 years ago. And at that time, it's really very like now, in many respects. In some respects identical, obviously, to now. And there was a generalized anxiety. I felt it in myself, with my friends, with my family, also in the media, with journalists, and all sorts of different places. A fear of what was coming, which motivated, or not a fear of what was coming, a fear of something that actually existed, and where that might lead would be a more accurate way of putting it. And then January the 6th happened. Now, January the 6th did not motivate the film at all because it was already written, but something existed in January the 6th, which is there was an implicit threat the whole time of violence that existed as a result of the polarization. And here it was starting to be manifested. And obviously I can't speak for everybody in this room, but I bet I could speak for most people in the room, where one of the things they felt with January the 6th was a kind of revulsion, a dismay, a disgust, because there was such a deeply wrong thing happening. And so in this film, when you talk about blowing up the Lincoln Memorial, I understand one could be glib about that. And in some ways films are glib, they just are, there's an element of that. But also there's something disgusting about blowing up the Lincoln Memorial. There's something disgusting about that kind of violence. And so, and that the attempt was, within a movie, to create, I hope, a sense of aversion to this. So war movies can be obscurely celebratory of violence in all sorts of complex ways, which of course I understand, I'm sure everybody understands. But that thing, I hope that the effect, obviously I can't guarantee it, is something repellent. That it's not celebratory, it's actually fucking disgusting. And not something that it makes one recoil, and you don't want to push towards it, you want to pull away. And so, yeah, that's a super long answer, but I've been doing interviews for the last 2 weeks, and all this stuff is just floating around my head. I apologize.
Well, the film opens on Friday, and hopefully you don't have to do 100 more of these.
You know what? I get on a plane tonight, and I'll be back home in 7 hours, and then I'll be making sandwiches and watching Netflix.
When you set out to make this film, someone said to you, don't make it about journalists because everyone hates journalists. What did you make of that at the time that you were told that?
I thought it was profoundly stupid. We have systems of checks and balances, and we have journalists, the fourth estate, for a reason. It's not arbitrary. They are actually guarding against something. They're guarding against fascism. They're guarding against extremist forces being out of control and not being properly checked and balanced. There was a thought experiment that I had, which was a semi-rhetorical thought experiment, but it was basically Woodward and Bernstein in the 70s with the Washington Post took down Nixon. Nixon was a crook, and they reported on it, and they led to him leaving office in disgrace. And would that happen now? And it wouldn't. We know, actually, factually, it wouldn't. And there's something terrifying in that, and actually the responsibility for that is complex. It belongs to politicians who go out of their way to undermine journalists, and it belongs actually to tech companies and social media and the context in which journalism happens. It also belongs in journalistic institutions that have consciously given up the idea of being unbiased and have become propaganda machines, which means it's impossible to trust them, inevitably. But it also lies with us. It lies with what we choose to consume, and it lies with how we perceive these people. And so I felt that was, in a way, obviously I feel strongly, I thought it was a pathetic statement. And I really disagreed with it, and I thought I will put reporters, unbiased reporters, front and center, war correspondents, because they are at the sharpest part of the sharp edge. They risk their physical safety, they can be compromised, they can be confused, they can be conflicted as individuals, but they are doing something necessary. So that's why.
And Lee has the great line where she says, we record so that everyone else can ask the questions in the film. And that's, it sums up in a very succinct and very interesting way exactly what her job is.
Good.
Well, you were, in some ways, kind of, I don't know, victim is a big word, but you told The Guardian that you wouldn't direct for the foreseeable future, and then everywhere it was as, he's never going to direct another movie. So it was something that started off probably in an interview, one of the 1,000 interviews you did that week, where it came out and it got blown up into a much bigger story than it ever should have been, simply because it made a better story than the foreseeable future line.
It's what it is it's a truly inconsequential story. I mean, it's like, some guy says not going to do this again. People sort of spin that in some kind of way, but it doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't really mean anything. But it is symptomatic of something else, and a slightly more, I think actually a significantly more relevant version of it was Jonathan Glazer, whose speech at the Oscars was taken wildly out of context. One section of the speech was taken to mean the entire. Now, you could disagree with him or you could agree with him. That is beside the point. The point is the way it's reported and the way it's received and the way people run with it. There is within that, I would say, a hysteria. And hysteria is unbalanced. Okay, I get a tiny fucking version of it. Like, I mean, seriously, who gives a shit if I direct again or not? But
There's a few people here that might.
all right, thank you. Very kind, thank you. But in other contexts, that can be very serious. And reductively, I think I'm swearing too much, but we just need to cut that shit out because it's childish and it's counterproductive.
You said you wanted to take questions from the audience. We have time for a few questions.
Really love the movie, and I was curious about the soundtrack of the movie, all the song choices, because I like the choices of Suicide, but like, how did you come to those songs, and were there any alternate songs you thought about and didn't use?
How did you come to this, just so everyone can hear, how did you come to the musical selections that we hear in the film?
That was actually a long, complex process, and it's got something within it to do with the power, the innate superpowers of cinema, and what happens if you put certain kinds of bits of music with violence, really, and how, if your intention, or at least your hope, is to make something that is anti-war, how easy it is to dismantle that. There's so many ways you can dismantle it, but one of it is music. So now that's subjective. You liked it. You've heard of Suicide, which makes you unusual, actually. That will obviously have different effects on different people. You just go with your instinct ultimately. But so it was partly tonal. And there was a secondary thing which was to do with, if it was very contemporary music, it dated the movie in a slightly weird way. So it was to push it out of time slightly. I think the most modern track is the country singer Sturgill Simpson, which is post 2000. Oh, cool. Are you Sturgill Simpson? No. It's a great track.
One of the things I found in common with January 6th in the film is the violence of regular people, both people who are kind of licking their chops, waiting for the opportunity to cause trouble, as well as people who are kind of caught up in the mania and the excitement of all around them. And rather than the kind of cult of personality and the politicians who are a lot of charismatics around the world who are kind of sparking kind of that, or inflaming what people might already be feeling. But in the film, I found the president is either both very kind of considered and rehearsing his own words, not kind of going off the cuff, and also he's like the only one that's there. So I'm wondering what kind of deliberate choices you made to kind of keep politicians and sort of their rhetoric out of the film entirely.
I'll just repeat so everyone can hear. Good expose, so good work there. So what steps did you take to make sure that rhetoric was kept out of the film by and large? That's essentially the question.
That is a very nuanced question, but it's also a very good, very fair question actually. What I did was I made an assumption, which may or may not be a fair assumption, but it was an assumption, and it's to do with the audience. And it's to do with their ability to interpret what's put in front of them, or just internally discuss what's put in front of them. And one of the things I felt was, number one, if I come clearly from a particular direction, it stops being a conversation and it becomes a diatribe. That would be number one. But I also wanted to provoke certain kinds of questions that really take individuals out of it, because it's more than individuals. It's a phenomenon that is occurring, and trust in conversations that might happen after a film or internally during the film. Why is this posed the way it is posed? And I will just give an example to be illustrative of that. It would be the Texas-California alliance would be a good example. Now, there are many statements made about the president, about what kind of president he is, how he has defined himself in some ways. Texas and California is an easy thing, because we know the differences between those states. Those states actually represent too many people polarization. They're an embodiment of it. Actually, of course, the states are large, complex places, but still they represent polarization. And this film, either, let's assume it's not stupidity, that I just don't know that that is the case, but it's a deliberate choice. What is that doing? What question does that provoke? Well, one thing is, it's a smokescreen, for sure, but also, I think it has an implicit suggestion, which is that these two polarized states have decided that a corrupt fascist is more of a problem than their polarized position. That is something that they can agree on. They can agree that fascism is a bad idea, so they are joining forces against it. Now, if a further implicit question follows from that, which is if someone is unable to conceive that Texas and California could agree to fight a fascist, then that says something about their relationship with polarization. They may be one of the people who is too polarized to imagine joining forces. Now, that's the terms in which this conversation takes place. I've been told a lot, this is not a political film. That is fucking bullshit. It is a political film, but it carries out its discussion in that way, because to me, I could be wrong, that is conversational. That is an exchange that could be had. I hope that's actually a good enough answer to a very fair question.
You have a plane to catch, so I'm going to ask the last question of what may be the last question on your press tour here, so you can get some much needed rest.
Sandwich.
Yeah, it's sandwich. 1876, the United States had the most disputed election ever up until the last election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. All the same things that came up in this last election that led to January 6th were at issue there. Polarization was everywhere, and eventually they got over it. So I'm going to try and end this on an optimistic note. Do you think that if they could do it once 150 years ago, that there is a possibility that things will right themselves and the ship will right themselves? Or has the internet and everything else that's come along since changed that?
Categorically, yes, I absolutely do think that. I mean, I really fully do think that. I am what you would call a centrist. I won't go into explaining that too much, but that's my political position. In that, part of what comes with that way of looking at the world is centre-left, I'll say, or for whatever it's worth. But what comes with that is a basic belief that people are not extremists. And I think, in general, people are not extremists. But the extremists have an incredible amount of currency at the moment, and they're making an incredible amount of noise. And it is up to non-extremists to rationally disagree and not fall into extremist positions themselves. Do I think that will happen? I absolutely do. I think we lean that way in effect, but we have the capacity for madness. Every country has the capacity for madness. So do I think it will happen? Yes, but is there a danger? Also yes.
Alex Garland, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Civil War is everywhere on Friday. Make sure you tell your friends. Thank you, Alex.
Hope you guys enjoyed that talk with Alex Garland. That movie absolutely blew me away. And if you haven't seen it yet, it hits theaters this week. So definitely check that out. And if you're looking for more behind the scenes stuff in film, music, arts and entertainment, and just a glimpse into the heart and soul of some creative minds, take a second to sub to this channel, because we got a lot more coming your way real soon. And we'll catch you then. Cheers.